interesting and unusual plants of the Pacolet Escarpment region to know and grow. So I'm trying to harp on things that are growable. You know, I could stand here all day, and you may have heard folks do it, like David Campbell. He could tell you about every plant out there in the woods. But I narrow my view to the showier ones that are growable. So I've just carved out that niche to talk about plants. And some of y'all, many homeowners, don't want to grow. They just want to see in the woods, and that's fine. So you can just ignore it when I talk about growing it. You can just know it. Not everybody wants to bother growing them. They just want to enjoy them if they already have them, and that's fine. That's certainly the lowest maintenance. If you've already got it, you don't have to worry about it. Because believe me, if you had the right conditions, perfect conditions for any of these plants, they'd be there. They've had millions of years of finding their way around in the woods, and if you know right where to look for a species, you can go out and find it. But the key is knowing what conditions to look for them in. Can you lower the lights some? Just so it's a little, I'd like it a little darker. Just a tiny bit of background about me so that I have some credentials. Audrey and I spent the past 40 years her keeping me in line. I was professor of botany and horticulture at UNC Charlotte and ran the botanical gardens there as well as teaching. And so we have 10 acres of gardens there. Our native plant garden is called the Van Landingham Glen. And you're welcome to visit. It's open 7 days a week. We have the largest collection of native plants of the Carolinas in a public display. And so people come and they walk around and they come out and they say, "Where was the garden? All I saw was the woods." well, the garden is a natural woodland, and that's part of the appeal. Is we've kept a piece of woods on a growing campus. And the guy who started it, the professor who started it, 1966, started as a rhododendron garden. So we have a lot of rhododendrons. But then we've also started bringing in native plants and trying to plant them in a naturalistic appearance. So it looks kind of natural, even when it snows. And we've tried to plant in interesting groupings or naturalistic groupings. We've tried all kinds of different things. But anytime you come, there are going to be things in bloom. Here's foamflower and phlox and rhododendrons and hemlock and ferns. We have about 50 different native ferns. And so I put all of this 40 years, maybe even 50 years of knowledge into this book, Native Plants of the Southeast and the best ones for the garden. So this is not a field guide, it's about growing in the garden. And so I've had personal experience with all these plants. It's been remarkable when I sat down to write this book, how much, I thought I was going to write it in one summer. So my advice, if any of y'all decide to write a book, it's going to take longer than you think. But it was a fascinating journey because I learned a lot more than I thought I knew. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on any one thing. But a little bit of background. When I give these talks, often the talks have different purposes, like a little more into home landscaping principles. I'm not going to go into that. But here's one type of home, a very formal home. There are no native plants in that landscape. It's all very formal, very manicured. Every plant there is pruned and touched and shaped and mowed and whatnot. And then at the other extreme, I love this place. This is down on the coast. This is just the opposite. Every plant in that picture is native. And every plant there is probably not touched. And so you've got to match your landscape to your temperament, whether it's got to be just such a way. But forward, I'm not getting a pointer on here, so I don't know where the pointer is. To the left and right. A little red. Oh, I'm afraid to touch anything here. Well, I did that, and I don't get a red dot. That's all right. I'll just do that. I'll use my hand if I want to. So this big tree here is a live oak, festooned with Spanish moss. These are native palms that grow there, native ferns that grow there, native trilliums that grow there. If you were to plant this around here, it would look funny, perhaps. You wouldn't expect to see Spanish moss in Polk County. So you plant for your local to some degree as much as you want to, but then you also bring in plants from all around the South to help fulfill landscape needs, you know. So I love this picture of a rustic setting, no lawn, all the colorful plants there, native azaleas, and viburnums and dogwoods and just all native plants that he's brought in, and fairly low maintenance. And then this is I'm not a purist, so I believe in using the right plant in the right place no matter where it's from. So this is kind of a mixed landscape where you got some natives and some non-natives, and the natives do what they do and the non-natives do what they do, and you come out with a happy mixture of things of fairly low maintenance. So I talk about all to keep in mind on the perfect yard. You got foundation plants, specimen plants, very special plants, accent plants, your little flowering trees, your big shade trees, borders around the edge of the property, screening plants, edging plants, ground cover plants, and then the last part, the lawn. People either love lawns or they hate lawns. If you want to plant a native lawn, there's only one grass, and that's St. Augustine grass. That's the only native to the southeast grass that you can consider a lawn grass. And it only grows that high, you almost don't need to mow it. It does not like super cold weather. So up here you might have a little issue with that. So it might not be your best lawn. But the point is as you think about your own property, you think about how you want a plant to perform. What function does it do in the landscape? And that's how you help decide what kind of plant you want, whether it's evergreen, big, little, low, whatever its traits you want it to be. So our yard is fairly small. We don't have to worry too much about all the landscaping that other people have to worry about. And so you think about what sort of home do you have and what sort of landscape do you want. Everybody has a different relationship with their property and it should reflect your interest and your temperament. So there you go. I haven't seen any of y'all's homes, but I could imagine some of them are like this, where you're out in the woods and you have only natural things, and you might have a few things you've brought in around the house. And certainly that's one way. And it's no lawn and fairly low maintenance, and you got something to look at year-round. A little wildflower garden. If you do nothing more than plant a few things that you like out in the front yard. So here's trilliums, white trillium, some little sweet Betsy trillium, some windflower, foam flower, wood poppies. Probably in here is green and gold, all kind of ground covers. I see wild geranium. There's 50 things you could grow in a little wildflower garden that grow in the woods around here. You could just bring some in, just collect a seed or a little piece of a plant. It's okay, and on your own property or where you have permission to get a little piece of something and bring it and plant it and water it and get it started. Or you can buy something. The best thing is to buy propagated plants from a nursery, and that way you've got them well established and they don't go through the trauma of being transplanted. But a good way to get plants is on areas that are going to be destroyed or disturbed. We call it rescuing, of course, and you have a certain chance of success with that. So many times in the past I've been out just ahead of a bulldozer digging up wildflowers on a roadside. It's just a shame to see anything beautiful like that destroyed, but sometimes you can't help it. Yes, sir?
Question, I thought some Jack in the Pulpit
Sure.
from Plants Plenty this year.
Yes.
And I've got the pod of the red
Seeds?
seeds.
Oh, good.
Now, should I just let those naturally do what they're going to do?
Well, you could do that. Birds will probably take them and eat them and carry them to the neighbor's house. If you want them in your yard, you should go out and as those seeds get redder and as the whole cluster of seeds falls over, pick them off, squeeze the seed out into some hole that you've selected. That would be your way of planting them. I don't eat them. They're not deadly, but they will injure your mouth if you eat them. So you're not a disperser of those seeds. Birds and turtles, you have to do it. But believe me, they will come up readily if you collect those seeds. You could even squeeze a whole bunch of them out into one plot, and seedlings would come up that you could then transplant. You could do it either. That's what I would do, would be to plant several seeds in one little place and then move them as they grew up, because I keep my eye on them. They'll grow readily. They have to go through the winter. That's an important point. Virtually, not all, but the majority of our native plants, their seeds have to go through a winter chill before they'll germinate. So don't collect seeds and keep them in the house waiting for spring. Collect them and plant them outside, either in a pot or in a cold frame, a greenhouse, in the basement or the garage, or outside, maybe protected from critters that might dig around them. Go ahead and plant them outside and let them come up next spring, because chilling is very important for most of our wildflowers. I'll show Jack in the pulpit later. So just a few reasons I talk about why to grow natives, why to use natives. They're better adapted to our heat and humidity here in the South than some of the northern plants that don't like heat. Our natives are just as beautiful as non-natives, with flowers and foliage and fruits. Using natives gives you a sense of place. If all you have are Japanese plants, you don't get the sense of place of where you are in the region. And by using at least a few natives, you get that. And I always say it's, as a rah-rah moment, it's time we planted more American plants instead of European, Japanese, and Chinese. Virtually all of our plants are from China and Japan, a few from Europe. Help feed native, this is the up-and-coming thing. You help feed native birds, bees, and butterflies. We're wanting to attract those animals and give them a little boost, because so much of the landscape has been disturbed. And the latest thing is the monarch butterfly. Plant milkweed plants to help the monarchs as they migrate south and north. They only feed on milkweeds. They're caterpillars. And it's really been a problem as more land has been converted to cultivated fields. And then there's just some new and interesting natives that are interesting that people haven't grown before, and so that can be a reason for growing natives. Of course, there are new plants from China and Japan. But like I say, I'm not a purist, but I do like to tell people about natives. At UNC Charlotte, if you come to visit, you'll see our new native terrace garden. It's a small plot, a quarter of an acre, I think, with native plants arranged in the situations where homeowners can appreciate them. Rain garden, borders, lawn, foundation plantings around around that brick patio. So you get to see natives used like you would use them in the landscape, in addition to seeing them over in our other garden as you would see them in the wild. So we're excited about the future of this garden. So you might recognize this map. This is the southern Blue Ridge Escarpment. I looked up PAC on the internet, and this is one of the pictures that popped up. So I don't know how much of this land is y'all's land. Here's Lake Lure, Lake Adger. I'm not sure exactly where you are on this picture. Here's Columbus. You're probably right in, must be right in here. But this outline is the Lake Lure, Chimney Rock area, what we call the eastern escarpment. And then the southern escarpment, the Blue Ridge Escarpment here along the South Carolina border. And all these fabulous places associated with high Highway 11 down through the upstate is just and to me as a botanist, just a unique place in all the world for the climate and the type of plants that are grown here. And so you should be very proud to be part of this region. When Audrey and I go to the mountains, we take every opportunity to drive on Highway 11. And me, more than Audrey, take every opportunity to stop right here at the Junction, which is a restaurant right there. In fact, I tried to get us to stop there yesterday, but we didn't have time. I just love their fried chicken. But anyway, this is a very special place up here, as you'll see, for some of the plants and some of the experience that we've had over the years. So
Markers, excuse me, I can't read, but
those are Nature Conservancy projects,
okay,
and so some of those may well be y'all's projects. I just simply don't know from this map. There's Saluda. Now, the other place I'm going to talk about where I want my ashes scattered, Pearsons Falls Road, right down through here, and the Pacolet River flows through. I can't quite. The resolution on this map is not so good, but the Pacolet Falls and Pearsons Falls and those places are some of the first places that I've ever went. Yes.
if you are at the junction, one morning at 8:30 is when PAC starts their hike sometime.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you are.
Well, someday I may be there. It's about an hour and 27 minutes from Charlotte to get there. So someday that might happen. And just to drive through this upstate, you wouldn't know. It's just pine trees and fields. But when you get off into the woods, so a couple other generalities, and you've heard this from Patrick McMillan. Patrick, who's from Clemson, can't quite picture. Clemson must be down here. Really understands this region. And you got to understand that there are at least two kinds of woods. There are more than that, but there's acid woods and less acid woods. Okay, and some of your greatest wildflower collections are in the less acid woods. If pines dominate and certain oaks and mountain laurel, rhododendrons and azaleas, those are acid woods. You don't get quite as many wildflowers there. But the woods that are dominated by other species and not things related to rhododendrons, those are the less acid woods, and they're usually rich. And I'll show you some of those special wildflowers. So the other special place, I guess, is up in this portion around Lake Jocassee. This escarpment has the four rivers: the horse pasture, Toxaway, Whitewater, and which one did I leave out? Horse pasture, Toxaway, Whitewater. I can't remember the fifth. The four rivers that flow down off the escarpment over in that area. This is where Oconee bells, the little wildflower Shortia, was first discovered by the French botanist André Michaud in 1785. No, it's Thompson, horse pasture, Thompson, Whitewater, and Toxaway. Those are the four big rivers that flow down off the escarpment. All right, we'll move on. So my favorite place in the world is Pearsons Falls Road. I've taken the North Carolina Native Plant Society. We've had a field trip there every few years. Just to walk along the roadside there is just right at your eye level is one of the greatest collections of wildflowers and trees and shrubs that you could ever hope for. There's 5 species of trilliums there. There's this beautiful creek that goes down and I think creates Pacolet Falls further down the mountain. Birches, buckeyes, oaks, hickories, maples, all kinds of trees, hemlock in there. I first got acquainted with this back in the late 60s, early 70s. The lush vegetation along here is amazing. And a very distinctive plant in here is false goat's beard, astilbe, our native astilbe. There it is, a very elegant plant that is almost not seen in cultivation. You can't buy it anywhere. It's at one or two nurseries, but it's a great native plant. Go there and collect seed. Well, it turns out I studied astilbe as part of my PhD thesis, and most of it was done right there on Pearsons Falls Road. And so Audrey and I know that road intimately. We've spent many hours there marking plants and looking at them. The other great plant there is goat's beard, aruncus. So goat's beard and false goat's beard look very much alike. They're abundant along Pearsons Falls Road, and they make pretty good garden plants. They're not 4-star garden plants, but they're 3-star garden plants. They have a limited blooming. That's a good point. In my book, for the first time ever, I gave star ratings to native plants to help people narrow down their choices. And so a 4-star plant would be just like a motel, I guess. How many good things does that plant give you? So a 4-star plant has no detrimental traits. It would be easy to acquire, easy to grow, and have 4 seasons of interest. In other words, the perfect plants. And then you come down from there. If there's a trait, like a plant's difficult to grow or could be the most beautiful plant in the world, but it might be difficult to acquire. That would make it then a 3-star plant. And then the 1-star plants would be something that you have and you don't need to go out and cut it down, but it's not something you would rush out and acquire. And so all plants have value somewhere, but the 1-stars are plants that have at least one good trait, and you might have them, you might keep them and enjoy them if you have them, but you wouldn't rush out and buy one necessarily. And you might see people along Pearsons Falls Road. You all know Tim Spira, who wrote this fabulous, you've got his book over here on yeah. His little book would be your field guide for this region, native plants and habitats. He arranges things by habitat in this region. So he's got the best field guide that I can recommend for this district. And then the woods, this picture was taken over at Pacolet, but it could look just like Pearsons Falls. It's a rich woods with a lush understory. It's not an acid woods. There are no azaleas, no rhododendrons. They may be in certain places, but they're not throughout the woods. They don't make up the woods. And so you've got 20 species of wildflowers in here, and it's just like heaven walking through there in the spring. Now, an experienced person will know the following answer. What happens when you walk through these woods in July? Stinging nettle. Stinging nettle. You don't walk through these rich woods in July. There may be snakes, I don't know, but it's the stinging nettle that gets you. So I have learned, oh yes?
I'll tell you another reason not to walk them in July, because the copperheads make that.
Okay, okay.
And,
Do they make noises when they're mating, so you stay away?
no.
Okay.
Very irritating.
Okay, I see. So that's the other reason not to go out in July. There are no flowers blooming in there in July, that's for sure. But they're wonderful in the spring. Pacolet Falls, not quite as big as Pearsons Falls, but it's beautiful. One of these escarpment waterfalls that cascades over the rocks. If you haven't seen Pacolet Falls, I assume the Pacolet Conservancy owns that piece of property. You get to it through going east or south out of Saluda on Page Road, and it's at the top of the escarpment out there. And if y'all haven't been there as a group, you should go there. It's one of the nicest woods I've ever been in. I don't know what it's called, but it has so many wildflowers. It has a lot of invasive plants. There's multiflora rose and a little bit of kudzu. We try to ignore those, but it's a great place to go walk in the spring. Okay. The other great place in this region is Chimney Rock Park. Boy, if I owned that, it would be like having the best collection of native plants in your backyard. I've been working there since the early 80s. If you've been there, you know there are nature trails all over the place, and we help the owners make a trail guide back in the early 80s. They may still use it, I'm not sure, but so many of those trails are not open now. But there's a fabulous collection of plants there, and what makes it, and I'll just tell you now, what makes Chimney Rock so unique is it faces east, but it has a vertical 400-foot vertical, almost perpendicular wall there. And that creates a cool spot at the bottom. The elevation is only 2,000, actually the top of it is 2,000 feet. The bottom is a little less than that. So it should be warm. And yet there are plants growing there that you would otherwise only find at the top of 4,000 and 5,000 foot mountains. So there's something special about that vertical rock face creating a unique habitat for unusual plants. And if you've been there, you know the Hickory Nut Falls, 400 feet. The base of the falls is all in the splash zone in here from the falls is a half a dozen rare plants that you don't find anywhere else except in that district, in that habitat. So I'm going to talk about some of the best shrubs from this area. So at Hickory Nut, at Chimney Rock Park, if you could walk up the old trails there, you would go through a zone on the rocks of drought-tolerant shrubs that are just fabulous and easy to get to. And so in the moisture places and the drier places and the north places and the south places, you've got different plants. One of the best is a native Paw Paw. This naturally grows in floodplains, low woods, but you can grow it out in the open. Babs and Bob have a nice specimen in their backyard. Spring flowers, these big 1-inch wide maroon flowers, if they get cross-pollinated, so it's good to have a couple of different trees if you're growing them for fruit. In the late summer, you'll get these big pawpaws. And this old song, way down yonder in the pawpaw patch, picking up pawpaws and putting them in your pocket. If you've ever done that, you would know that by the time you get home, you got a wet mush of squishy, sweet-smelling fruits in your pockets. I don't know how that came about. I believe I'd put pawpaws in a basket instead of a pocket.
I would say my experiences with pawpaws that we have is what happens is they drop when they're still green and hard.
Okay.
And then you take them in and set them on the counter and wait until they...
Okay, that's a good... If you can get them before the little woodland creatures, yeah. If you wait for them to fall ripen, they're spirited away in the middle of the night, the raccoons and possums. But if you can get some green pawpaws nearly ripe to ripen on your counter, they have the smell of tropical, and they make really good tarts and pies. And I think we should revive the art of pawpaw pies. So here's a specimen you could have in your yard. You don't want to plant it this close to the house. They don't get to be giant trees, but they do have a nice presence. They're informal. And here's a Paw Paw Fruit, maybe a little larger than what you normally would see, but they're full of big seeds. Of course, you don't eat the seeds, but the flesh in there is tasty. And the fall color is outstanding. A beautiful yellow fall color. The more sun, the better. And the best part is the pawpaw is the only food plant for the zebra swallowtail butterfly. So if you want zebra swallowtails, you've got to have pawpaw trees so their funny-looking little caterpillars over there have something to eat.
We have hundreds of pawpaw in the woods.
Have you seen these swallowtails? These are summer flying. They're pretty rare. They're fleeting. But that would be... This is one of the best examples I know of how a beautiful butterfly has only one food plant, and you've got to have that food plant for it. Whoopsie, didn't want that to happen. Another great native that very few people know, everybody knows Paw Paws, but not very many people know the Wafer Ash. The Wafer Ash has compound leaves, 3 leaflets. It doesn't look like poison ivy, but it still has 3 leaflets. A small shrub. It makes these big flat fruits. They're like wafers. They're 1 inch across. They ripen in the fall. They bloom in the spring, and they make little greenish flowers, not very showy, but they're fragrant. And my botany professor back in school, when we first encountered this, he said, this is the one plant that you find first with your nose. So you smell it. It's fragrant, it wafts through the woods. And it's the food plant. It's the, because it's in the citrus family, with orange, it's the food plant of the giant swallowtail butterfly. So if you want more giant swallowtails, plant more Wafer Ash. It's an easy to grow plant. That'd be something, Babs, for you to have right out front here in this open place. It can grow in shade or sun. The more sun, the more flowers. You can get them, I believe, Woodlander's nursery. Certainly for one, sells them. It's not a 4-star plant. It doesn't have fabulous fall color, and it doesn't have big showy flowers. But it's a pretty nice plant. It's got interesting, that fragrance is pretty nice. And the butterflies, of course, are good. Another plant from Chimney Rock, the wild mock orange. You almost never see this in normal woods. It grows in the less acid woods, and it likes rocky woods. It makes a big shrub, blooms in late spring for over a long period of time. The flowers are more than 1 inch across, so it's showy, but it's not fragrant. And so it's got its unique time of year. The fall color is not outstanding, so it's one of those plants that you may not put right up front and center, but it's a great plant for the garden. It can take the dry climate. And I think it's very beautiful. Fringe tree. If you don't have a fringe tree, your neighbors probably wonder if you're from someplace else. Because here in the South, everybody's yard out in rural areas has a fringe tree. And so you need to go out in the woods, dig one up, bring it and put it in your yard somewhere. In the spring, they look like that, covered with little white flowers. One of their common names, I think, is the white fleece flower, called Grancy graybeard, as well as fringe tree. And they're just ubiquitous throughout the lower elevations of, in the fall, the leaves turn yellow. They can have little purple berries. Here's the close-up of the flowers. They're fragrant when they bloom, and they require no maintenance. They're usually found in dry woods that are less acid. Carolina hemlock. These are abundant at Chimney Rock Park. You can see the distribution over here. They're not widespread, but their stronghold is the southern Appalachians. And right around here, they grow on places like Chimney Rock Park in the dry woods. You know, the Canada hemlock is all going to go away. They're being killed by this aphid-like insect, the hemlock woolly adelgid. So all the big hemlocks are dying. I imagine they've lost all their big ones at Chimney Rock Park. But the Carolina hemlock is less susceptible. It grows slower. It makes a better garden plant because it does grow slower. It can take sun or shade. You have to plant it where you don't water it. It doesn't want any extra water. It would have gone through this drought without any extra water. They're the needles and the cones. The cones are about 1 inch long. They're bigger than the Canada hemlock. The needles are very fluffy, so it makes a very fluffy looking tree, not in flattened branches like Canada hemlock. So I can't recommend highly enough a Carolina hemlock if you like that sort of thing. Question?
Could you go over again the difference in terms of the way the needles are?
Sure. On Canada hemlock, which I don't really, the needles are in flattened branches.
This is Canada.
Canadian hemlock, which is far and away the commonest tree in western mountains. They're everywhere. It's a mainstay of many of the woods.
Is another name for the eastern hemlock?
Might be eastern hemlock, but Canadian hemlock is far and away its best known name. And its branches are, the needles are in one plane, so they're flattened. Whereas the Carolina hemlock, the needles go all around the branches, and so they look more like a bottle brush. So it's more fluffy, and it looks fuller. It's not as graceful. Canada hemlock has graceful branches that kind of droop on the ends. Carolina hemlock is a little stiffer, a little more columnar, much tighter and much slower growing. And so it stays in scale of your garden for a longer time. Canada hemlock grows up into a big tree pretty quickly. Whoopsie. Shad bush. This is the plant that has more common names than anything else. Sarvisberry, shad bush, Juneberry, serviceberry, shad blow. Up in the mountains here, it's best to call it sarvisberry or serviceberry because it, as folklore has it, it bloomed. It was the first tree to bloom in the end of winter after the worst of snow was over. And so it was a signal that winter was basically over. And so the itinerant preachers could get out and start going up into the mountain hollers to have services, weddings, marriages, burials, christenings, whatever. So that's how it got the name serviceberry, and then that was modified into sarvisberry, which I like a lot, call it sarvisberry. So great spring flowers. In the summer it has beautiful berries. They're the berries in June, hence the name Juneberry. These are quite edible. We don't get them in June, the birds get them. In fact, they'll probably get them before you do. The fall color is unrivaled. There's no better fall color. And I recommend this shrubby one. You can get some that grow into trees, but the shrubby ones, one called Autumn Brilliance, is more human scale. You can see it better. And then I just love this picture of a mountain scene with the sarvisberry blooming, looking out into the Piedmont. It's brief in bloom, but it's your first native thing to bloom in the spring, first shrub. And then there's no finer 4-star plant than chokeberry. It has white flowers in the spring. In the fall, red berries, and the leaves turn just a brilliant fall color, and the berries hang on into the winter. In fact, you can see over here, here's last year's berries still on there with spring flowers. So if the birds don't eat them, those berries will last all winter. Here's a picture of it in the fall when the leaves are colored. I don't know of any plant with more red. The buds are red, the berries are red, the leaves are red, the twigs are red. So it's a great plant. The more sun, the more berries you get. But you don't eat them. And yet, if you look on the internet, you'll find some websites that tout this as a miracle juice for humans that cures everything that's wrong with you. I have never eaten them. The berries are bitter when I've tried to eat them, but maybe after a winter freezing and thawing, the berries mellow a bit. So who knows, this may be the secret to longevity if you learn how to prepare those berries. Okay, my favorite little shrub, which is so inconspicuous to most people, leatherwood, Durca palustris. The reason I mention the Latin name is because there's some other plants we've discovered that have the common name leatherwood. This is a small shrub. Biggest one I ever saw was probably 8 feet high. They don't get big. They're in less acid woods over on Pearsons Falls Road and everywhere else, really. The spring flowers come early. They're tiny. They're not showy. but in their small microscopic way, they have a lot of character. So you have to get up close and look at them. Makes a shrub. The shrubs have green leaves, little greenish berries in June, not much to look at. But the interesting thing is you can tie the twigs into a knot. That's how it got the name Leatherwood. Apparently the Indians used the strips of these twigs as thongs to tie things together. Every year out in our botanical gardens, I'd go out and on a tour or something, tie one of these twigs into a knot. Now our little shrub has even some 10-year-old knots where it keeps on growing. And so what could be better than that? You've got a plant you can do something with like that. So that makes it for all those different little subtle ways, one of my favorite plants. And you can buy this from Woodlander's Nursery. That's another great nursery down in Aiken, South Carolina, that grows southeastern natives. You got to have a witch alder, Fothergill. Witch alder is a shrub. There's a mountain form and a coastal form. The mountain form grows right around here. It's at Chimney Rock Park in the drier woods. It has beautiful spring flowers that look like a bottle brush. The fall color is as fine as any plant. Yellows, reds, oranges. It stays compact and grow in shade or sun. There's a kind of a shrub on the left there. You can see on the right how abundant it can bloom in the sun. There's several different selections available. Anyway, I don't know whether you have some around the Nature Center. Okay, but it's a 5-star plant. I mean, it's so great. Azaleas. Everybody knows our native azaleas. We have 16 species of native azaleas here in the east. And they range from Florida up here through the Carolinas. That's the range of the native azaleas. Flame azalea is the most well-known, but it's not the only one. They come in yellow, shades of yellow and orange. The more sun you have them, the more blooms you get. They have good spring flowers, nice form, great fall color. Their buds are attractive in the winter. There are many, many hybrids and selections and colors that are available. They're becoming one of the mainstays of native nurseries. You can get so many different forms of these. They look good all mixed in the garden. So your native azaleas would be this yellow one and these pinky ones and whitey ones. And then these are your evergreen azaleas. They're from Japan, and they're evergreen, and they're great as foundation plants. You can even prune them. I wouldn't prune the native azaleas. Oh, I just noticed here's some pitcher plants. I study pitcher plants. So right here on the edge of this little pond, there's some aquatic plants. There's a yellow pitcher plant in bloom. It's amazing. So in your garden, you could have all kind of habitats. You have wetland habitat to a woodland habitat and grow that you might not see in the wild, but you can recreate a little artificial scene. Here's most ubiquitous in the Piedmont of the azaleas is the Piedmont azalea throughout the South. Very fragrant, attract butterflies and moths and even bees, but butterflies are the effective pollinators. And they come in almost pale, almost pure white to some rich pink colors. So a good time to, as with anything, a good time to go to a nursery is when these things are blooming and you can pick out the colors you like. You do the same thing with the Japanese evergreen azalea. The first Carolina rhododendrons I ever saw. These are true evergreen rhododendrons with small leaves. First one of these I ever saw was on Pearsons Falls Road. So there are places there where rhododendrons and azaleas grow. And they're, okay, that's very good. That would be a good woods to check out. These come in many. Nowadays you can get hybrids of these, different colors, white, pink. Not yellow, but different whites and pinks, and they make great garden plants. They're native right here in the, well, here's a map. Here again you can see they center here on the southern Appalachians. And so right here in the escarpment region, they're just abundant. hollies, evergreen holly and deciduous hollies. The winterberry holly is a deciduous. I noticed you have a couple of these out in the beds out here. There's something special about these winter hollies. You have to have a mockingbird with them. Hollies should come with mockingbirds. There should be a little cage attached. You need a male mockingbird to protect that holly from all the other birds so that they don't come eat all the berries. Because you want those berries to last into this picture was taken in February, and the berries look excellent as long as the birds don't come eat them. Now, of course, if you're planting them for the birds, then you have to not mind if they come eat them. But if you're planting for the berries, you don't want the birds to come eat them, so you need a male mockingbird. You put a little sign out in front of your house, wanted resident male mockingbird, excellent facilities, drop off your resume. So when it snows in February, these hollies are fabulous in the garden. It has to get down close to zero before the cold starts hurting them. Now there is one other secret. In addition to the male mockingbird, you have to know that the holly plants come in male and female separate sexes. So you have to have a male and you have to have a female in order to get berries. And they have to be compatible. That is, they have to bloom at the same time. And so a lot of people call me up and say, I don't have berries on my holly. What's wrong? Well, you either have a male only, or you have a female only, or you have a male and a female, but they don't bloom at the same time. You didn't get the right male. Oh, you have to have the right male. Well, we don't want to talk about that. But it's the same situation. They're early, middle, and late blooming males. So you have to have the right one to go with your early, middle, or late blooming female. And so if you get the right ones, then you've got abundant berries. And almost everybody has to go through that trauma of not having them and then getting the right one. So, and you can go out and sex your own plants in the spring when they bloom. They actually bloom in late spring. The males have abundant stamens, yellow pollen-producing stamens, and the females just have a big green ovary with no stamens. So you could go out and tell, and the whole point is they have to bloom at the same time.
Well, Larry, would nurserymen know what a compatible?
They should, but don't always. So that's where you have to look in my book or look online. They're named selections, and they're all available. And you should ask your nurseryman. If the nurseryman doesn't know what you're talking about, don't buy anything there.
Remind us again what plant you're looking at.
Okay, this is the holly, the deciduous holly, the one of many selections of winterberry holly.
Okay.
And the leaves will fall. The leaves turn yellow in the fall and fall off. Yours are doing that out here. And then the berries will be on there for the winter. So winterberry. There's actually several different hollies. There's different names you'll encounter: possum haw holly, winterberry holly, swamp holly, sparkleberry holly. There are a lot of these available at nurseries now, but still they're not common at the upscale. You might find an upscale nursery that has some of these, but mostly you're going to have to find a mail order. The nursery down in Greer, South Carolina, should have the appropriate ones. Okay, so you got to get the appropriate, and so they've got to be named, and you've got to know which named ones go together. Like if you're growing the female holly called Stoplight, which is the largest berry, it's a dwarf. You need a male called Southern Gentleman. The other males are called Apollo. And I've forgotten the third male. I'll think of it in a minute. But they all have male names. Oh, Red Escort. It's called. All right, so there's the hollies. Hollies are a big deal, and it's worth the effort because they're such great plants in the wintertime, in the winter garden. So some perennial wildflowers. These would be herbaceous wildflowers. We all know and love purple coneflower, but it's not the best plant. They're beautiful and they're great and they bloom a long time. They attract goldfinches, love the seeds. And you should have one, but just realize this is not the climate for them. I'll show you. What's better is our native southern smooth coneflower. Not quite as flashy, but still interesting, and still attracts goldfinches. Here's the deal. The purple coneflower is mostly out here in the prairies. And it just barely tiptoes into the Carolinas. And all of these dots of Carolinas are actually old plants from cultivation, because this was such a famous medicinal plant. Echinacea, everybody knows echinacea as a, what does it do? It cures everything, I don't know, for colds and flu and those sorts of things. So it was spread by both Native Americans and early white people as a medicinal plant. So the ones we're seeing here are leftovers, and it's garden escapes, and they don't do well here. They're short-lived. Whereas the smooth coneflower is native in this exact zone, and look, right here in upstate is one of its strongholds, right in there. And they like open, sunny meadows that are less acid, with modest rainfall, well-drained soil, and that's what we have here. So that would be a better, in the long run, would probably be more long-lasting than the purple coneflower that's so abundant in garden centers. You can't buy this smooth coneflower except at a botanical garden plant sale where they've been grown specially. But they're worth seeking out. Clemson would be a good place to get them. Here in our woods, finding heartleaf ginger is a real treat. These evergreen heart-shaped leaves with mottling on the leaves. Oh, and there's a nodding trillium there with it. These heartleaf gingers are just fabulous. The leaves are evergreen, and the winter leaves are just beautiful. And the patches get bigger every year as they grow. And there's a half a dozen species. Here are the flowers. The flowers are not, you got to look for them down under the leaves. But here's a whole big patch of them, of the flowers and the beautiful leaves. The leaves are evergreen. And some of these are available commercially, and so I recommend the heartleaf ginger. We've got maybe 5 species that grow naturally in this district. Joe Pye Weed. You can't if you only have one plant, it'd be Joe Pye Weed. These grow all through the mountains and the coast. They get tall. Some get 12 feet tall, some get 10 feet tall, 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet, 2 feet. So depending on what height you want, you buy a particular selection of Joe Pye Weed. These are butterfly magnets. So if you plant one, you're going to have butterflies. And they make great garden. They're majestic. They're big. They bring structure to the garden. They go really well with some of your water features that you might have in your garden. See, there's the Joe Pye Weed. This is a 12-foot Joe Pye Weed. But nurseries have bred these to be smaller now. Like I say, you can get them every 2 feet in height. So you can have whatever height you really want. And when they're in bloom, the butterflies just have to take a number. They just can't all fit on the plants. And in our yard, when ours are in bloom, if I want to bring one in to put in a vase, I have to shake the butterflies off just before I go in the house, or they'll come right in with you. So there's no single better butterfly plant than Joe Pye Weed. Here you've got tiger swallowtails, and this is the famous pipe vine swallowtail with its blue upper wings. It eats the Dutchman's pipe vine only, and it's such a beautiful butterfly in the mountains. Now, Cardinal Flower, another just fantastic, well-known, it's the kind of plant you could possibly buy at a nursery, bloom in mid to late summer. famous for hummingbirds. Bright red, tall plant, 1 to 2 feet tall. This is a patch that I sit out in our front yard and I look at. It's about 4 feet away, maybe 5 feet away from where we sit. And so a couple summers ago, I was sitting out there watching this plant in July, and up comes this hummingbird. And they've gotten really used to us, so they fly around. They'll come look at you, then they'll go off. And so this hummingbird came up here and he said, you know, you guys, you put out hummingbird feeders. And these hummingbird feeders, they're nothing but sugar water. And they attract us, and we fight over these hummingbird feeders. And they're fun to look at. But you know, we're getting too fat. This is like fast food for hummingbirds. Just sugar water. So he says, plant more natives that we like, make us work for it, because when we drink the nectar out of Cardinal Flower, we're getting proteins, vitamins, minerals, and sugar water. And so it's a little more balanced nutrition. And then he flew away. So I bring you that message from the Hummingbird Association. Plant more. Hummingbirds like anything that's red. Trumpet vine, cross vine, coral honeysuckle, cardinal flower, and there are other, I'll show you some other red flowers, but anything like that, you can have hummingbirds in your yard all summer. Shooting star is just a fabulous native plant. Blooms for a month. The flowers hang down. It grows up from a cluster of leaves, and the flowers hang down. They're just beautiful. It looks like the petals have been blow dried, have been blown back away from and the stamens are down here. And the pollen comes out just from the ends of the stamens. Only special insects can pollinate these, and those insects are bumblebees. So bumblebees will get on these flowers, and you know what bumblebees do? They buzz. And you've heard them buzz at different frequencies. They go buzz, 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 buzz. You hear bumblebees buzzing at different frequencies. What they're doing is vibrating the pollen out of the stamens and onto their bodies, and they have to figure out what frequency sucks that pollen out, whether it's a tomato plant, a shooting star, a pepper, a rhododendron. All of these flowers have stamens where the pollen only comes out through a little hole on the end, and that means only certain bees can vibrate that pollen out. So that's why bees buzz. It has to do with them shaking the pollen loose and sucking it out of the flower. And you can watch these things for hours in your front yard. I don't know of any wildflower I like better than shooting star, because they're so cute looking and they attract bees. Coreopsis. This is a common, I guess the common name is tick seed. That's not such an endearing name. But these are common in the dry woods around here. And they make pretty good garden plants. They bloom all summer. There's a half a dozen species of Coreopsis. This one is the Coreopsis major. What is that? The large flowered tick seed. And they're available commercially. What I want to mention to you is the one I have in the pot over there, the broadleaf tick seed. This plant was on the endangered species list until one of my students studied it back about 1982. It was on the state endangered list. It was only known from maybe 6 locations. And so it was centered on Tryon Mountain. Was some of the locations. So we came up to start studying it, and we messed all around Tryon Mountain, and we messed all around Sassafras Mountain down in South Carolina. And it's even found on Pearsons Falls Road. But the mother lode was at Chimney Rock Park, up on the top side of the chimney, on special soil type up there, rock called amphibolite, which is heavy in certain minerals and low acidity. We found 10,000 broadleaf tick seed. So they took it off the endangered species list because we found some. Often we found it at Bat Cave. So here's a plant that, until somebody went out and studied it, didn't know much about it. Once you go out and study it, you find all kinds of things. What's unique about it as a wild plant, it's only known from just, Polk, Rutherford, upstate South Carolina, maybe a little bit west, but not much, so it's very local. But it blooms in the full shade in August. So how many wildflowers that are worth looking at bloom in August in the shade? So I've been promoting this as a potentially good late summer blooming wildflower when not a lot of other things are in bloom for the garden. And so we'll see how that catches on. It's not the most beautiful plant in the world, but it blooms in August in the shade. So that's what's good about it. Well, there's a pretty... these are the rocks down along Highway 176 as you leave Saluda and drive down through Walhalla, heading towards Tryon and Columbus. So you get these exposed rocks up there. Those bridges in there are so narrow that 2 cars can hardly pass if you know that road. It's scary. It's a scary road. And if you drive too slowly along there, the kudzu will come out and engulf you. That valley into there, I think, is one of the first places they planted kudzu. But on these rocks, you find fabulous plants. And one of my favorites is the fern leaf Phacelia. This is a biannual. You plant the seeds in the summer, they come up in the fall, they go through the winter, they bloom in the spring, and then they die away. And this picture doesn't do them justice. They make big, like 2 by 2 foot plants covered with these little blue flowers for about 2 months. So they're really great in the spring. Hard to come by. Somebody has to grow them from seed and either put them in pots. Or you could go there and collect your own seed. They're right along the roadside, so you can find a place to park along that narrow road. Fire pink, one of our most beautiful wildflowers. Nothing is redder than fire pink. And you might think this is a hummingbird plant, and it is. Hummingbirds love it. But it's primarily a butterfly plant. Now, I'll tell you the secret for identifying plants pollinated by butterflies. Moths can hover, and hummingbirds can hover. But butterflies have to land. And they need something to hold on to when they land. And so flowers that are adapted for butterflies have to have little places for the butterflies to hook their feet. And that's what these notches are for the butterflies to hook their feet. And this family, the pink family, fire pink, catchfly pink, all the different carnations are pink. This is the carnation family. It gets the name pink family, not because the flowers are light red, but because it looks like they've been pinked with pinking shears. So the notches in the petal, think of a carnation, the petals are notched. That goes back to being pinked. Okay, that's why it's called the pink family. And those notches are there for the butterflies to hold on with. So you watch these. If you have them in your garden, you can watch them, and you'll see how they work. The third plant that are abundant out there on those rocks is Small's beard tongue. Here's a picture of it in a garden scene. It makes an attractive late spring plant. The flowers in close-up are fabulous. They're an inch long, tubular. They have an open mouth. And if you look down inside, you see why it's called beard tongue, because one of the stamens is all hairy. It's a non-functional stamen. We don't know why it's a hairy stamen. Maybe it tickles the stomach of the bee, but bees visit these flowers by crawling in there. This blooms for a month. It lasts for a couple of years. It reseeds in the garden. So it's a great native plant for a dryish, sunny, or shady site. Small's beard tongue. These last few slides are some special flowers found only in this the escarpment region here in South Carolina, of our region, only down along the escarpment. Allegheny spurge is one of our finest native plants, no matter what. It's an evergreen ground cover, grows in any kind of situation. In the wild, it's only in less acid woods. These leaves are mottled, they're evergreen. There it is in bloom in the spring. Here's a kind of a patch of it. It spreads in the woods, and it's great for slopes. It grows so tightly it chokes out other plants. Although I see a trillium has somehow found its way into this patch of Pachysandra or alligator spurge. Just one of our just super world famous evergreen ground covers. So can't recommend it highly enough. The Allegheny spurge, and it's not common in upstate South Carolina and adjacent North Carolina. And then, if I could only have one wildflower, it'd probably be this, Indian pink. Grows in less acid woods, dryish woods in the upstate and adjacent South Carolina. It's a herbaceous plant, perennial, 1.5 feet tall. The clumps get bigger. Here's the flowers. If you like these kind of flowers, there's no prettier flower. And because they're red, tubular, they're visited by hummingbirds, and they bloom over a long period of time. And so they're a great garden plant. Indian pink.
And that's in the wood?
Yes, you would find it in dryish wood. It can take anything, but in nature it grows in less acid. And when I say less acid, I mean the pH is probably 6.5 instead of 5.5. In a woods with rhododendrons and azaleas, the pH is 5.5. But these grow in less acid woods, so the pH is closer to 7, but it's still slightly acidic. I've not seen anyone have any problems growing these in virtually any soil as a garden plant. But in the wild, it's only in the less acid woods. They're just beautiful. Same woods, you find the whorled horse balm. So what could be better for you guys in the horse country here? You should have horse balm. It's a low-growing plant, spreads from very thick, kind of a tuberous growing stem. And in spring, these beautiful pink flowers last a couple of weeks. Not long-lasting. But you know, some of the best things in life are brief. So I won't mention any things, but I mean, it doesn't take long to eat an ice cream cone. I mean, that's just one of the great things. So these short-lived flowers are still worth having because they're so wonderful when they're in bloom.
And horses do not.
Do they?
Yeah, I was riding in an area where someone was, and I didn't realize it was there, and my horse was leaning down.
Really?
And that's when I realized what it was.
Because some of them have a light fragrance of anise if you crush them. I don't know if anise is attractive to horses, but it certainly would allow them to smell it. Well, that's interesting.
He was just grabbing it.
Okay. This is a plant that is not in general cultivation yet, the round-leaved beggar's lice. What a terrible name. But it's a beautiful ground cover with big leaves. It creeps over rocks. The young growth is red. The older growth is mottled. And it's just beautiful. It has little pink flowers in the late summer. I'm introducing this to cultivation. My first plants came from the upstate of South Carolina. It does grow in other places, but it loves dryish woods and is a fabulous little ground cover. So if you have some on your property, I guess part of my reason for showing some of these is just to see you might have some of these things in your own woods, and that would be great to see some of these less common things. The last group of plants are the trilliums. Trilliums are everybody's holy grail. They want to grow trilliums. Trilliums are easy to grow. There are 40 species in the eastern North America. You've got two kinds of trilliums. You've got your sessile trilliums where the flower sits right on the leaf. And then you've got your stalk trilliums, kind of hard to see, where the flower sits up on a stalk. There are a lot of trilliums in this. So this one in the bottom clump there. By the way, the blue flower is excellent garden plant, but it doesn't grow around here. It's called Virginia bluebells. It grows everywhere but here. It grows to the west, it grows to the north. Trillium, that trillium there, the bent trillium, is just an excellent trillium to grow. And its flower, a similar one, Trillium simile, I don't know its common name, the similar trillium, doesn't mean much. But these grow along Pearsons Falls Road and other places in this southwest district. And they're just excellent. They look up at you in the garden and are really nice. And then down in the Pacolet Falls woods, there we found a whole group of hybrid trilliums, which was interesting, just to let you know what some of the more famous things down in this area. There are 3 or 4 species of trilliums there that hybridize and give you these different color forms. You would see these if you went down through those woods in late April, I guess, up until about 1st of May. The little Sweet Betsy trillium is one of the best, easy to grow, spreads from seed, comes up early, smells like fruit, and has mottled leaves, so after the flower's gone, it still adds to the garden, makes big clumps. This is a picture in our gardens at UNC Charlotte, our little log cabin back there in the background. The nodding trillium, or Catesby's trillium, a beautiful trillium common here in the upstate and adjacent here. Pink flowers, they hang down, they bloom in late spring, and really, really nice. They're charming. They come in white and pink. Then the pale trillium, this is a very rare trillium, only grows over in those counties adjacent to the border between Georgia and South Carolina. This is the first trillium to come up in the spring in like February. The last one to bloom in May. So it's kind of unusual, but it has beautiful mottled leaves and pale yellow flowers. So you could easily grow a dozen trillium. There are about a dozen trilliums that are available commercially from some of the nurseries. They're kind of expensive. They're like orchids. It takes a long time to grow them from seed. But once you have one, you have it forever. I have the first trilliums I ever grew 45 years ago. Still growing. The last 2 plants are not for the garden necessarily, but I want to mention them to let you know just how famous this area is. There's looking up at, I don't know that that's table rock, but it's the kind of rocks that you see in the escarpment. And if you can make your way up there on these patches of vegetation out there where the water seeps out over the rock, you get little bog type habitats where pitcher plants grow. So the mountain sweet pitcher plant is probably the rarest of the 11 pitcher plants in the south. And I've studied it a little bit. If you take your life into your hands, you don't ever want to go up there alone. But on these little waterfalls that flow over the rocks, if you could tie yourself to a tree, is what we had to do. Because if you slip and fall, you don't stop until you hit Spartanburg down this mountain. But it's remarkable. It's unbelievable unless you could go see it. The vegetation that grows right on the edges of these waterfalls, and these pitcher plants that get 1.5 feet tall are just magnificent. They're growing in little seepy areas right along a waterfall. Back behind here where you can't see are huge clumps of them. This one's out in the foreground. And these pitcher plants are carnivorous plants. They're tubular pitchers, attract and catch insects, flies and beetles of all kinds, just all kinds of things. So they're famous and unique plants. And some folks, mainly me, believe that there are 11 species of these, and I think this is the most primitive one. And I believe they arose, they originated here in the southern Appalachians in the Escarpment region. Yeah, oh yes. There's only about, there's just a handful of known locations. And they're all on the very inaccessible, on these waterfalls. The accessible sites are underneath buildings over around Flat Rock and Hendersonville. That was where they were first discovered in the 1930s by a botanist who used to come to spend the summers at Flat Rock. And he would, rather than sitting home reading novels, he would go out and poke around in the woods. And so he found all these rare plants here. And so this was one of them. It's quite rare now, but it's, in those places where it grows, it's very happy and growing just fine. But it's hard to get to go see them. The other super famous plant here is Oconee bells. It almost should be the symbol of the escarpment region. Was discovered in about 1785 by Andre Michaud, and then lost for 100 years. Nobody could find it again, because Michaud had written on his herbarium specimen in the high mountains of Carolina. And so all the botanists that came to look for it started at Grandfather Mountain, Roan Mountain, Mount Mitchell, Klingman's Dome, and yet it came from 1,000 feet over Horse Pasture River, what's now Lake Jocassee. Lake Jocassee covered up half of the known populations of this. So it wasn't discovered until somebody accidentally found it 100 years later. But it grows in the woods, it spreads, it's a little evergreen herbaceous plant that makes a carpet in the woods. It blooms in March. This map is inaccurate. It's only known from these 3 counties and adjacent North Carolina. All these other counties are where it's escaped from cultivation and has been discovered. So it really is, as far as the world map goes, this is the tiny pinpoint of space. And part of the reason is here in the escarpment region, things have not changed much in the past, 250 million years. No glaciers, no oceans, no volcanoes. Continental drift has been over for a long time. The ice ages came and went, and here in the southern Appalachians, things didn't change that much. So it's been a very, very stable habitat. The closest relative of this is in China and Japan. And we believe they once had a much more widespread range, but over the eons of climate change and the rise of the Rockies and the creation of the deserts and all the climatic changes in the north, these have become isolated and survived here in the southern Appalachians. So that makes them just super special. They're one of the world's most famous plants. So I hope what I've talked about today increases your appreciation of your native flora here, and as you go out and look around at it, look a little more carefully and see some of these rare plants. And if it causes you to get excited and want to get some new plants, then you should go to our plant sale at UNC Charlotte the weekend of October 16th. We also have a plant sale next spring.